This is a mastery course for Fujifilm X-M5. So we're gonna hop right into the unboxing of this camera. So open it up, this is a simple pull tab. We have some information on how to register the product, some more information about the lens, a Capture One free trial. Let's hop into the left side here. We can see there is Fujifilm X-M5, and hopping into this right side, there we have the lens. And then last, we have the neck strap. So inside of this box, I have all the accessories that I purchased, a screen protector, which I'll have linked below. Then I have that L bracket from SmallRig, a thumb grip from SmallRig, and I also have a red shutter button for the camera. So we're gonna be using this dust absorber to get any dust that has fallen on the screen or made its way onto the screen. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and get these guide stickers and put this on the screen protector to help me guide it into place. Just gonna guide this into place, push down. Looks like we had a successful screen protector install, which means that this screen is now safe. So the next thing that we have to do is install the battery, and this comes with the smaller Fujifilm batteries. And as you can see, you have this orange tag here that will face up, and these pins here on the bottom are gonna go down into the camera. And if you take a look at the camera, you'll see that those pins are down in this corner, and you're just gonna line those up and slide this in here. Orange will match the orange, and then it's just gonna click into place. The next accessory is more of an essential, and that is an SD card. And I recommend getting a fast SD card with a ton of storage because you're gonna need this to maximize the video quality that you can get out of this camera. This actually goes in that battery compartment that we just closed up. So you could do this at the same time, but you have to make sure that you have an SD card slotted into this camera. Otherwise, it won't be able to save anything because it has no internal memory. So if you bought the combo, which I highly recommend you do, for an extra $100, you get the 15 to 45 kit lens. So to get this lens attached to the body, you're just gonna press this button here and then twist. And then similar on this one, you're just gonna twist this off, and then you're gonna line up this red dot with this red dot on the lens. And once you do that, you can just snap this into place by turning the lens, and then all of a sudden you have a full camera kit. So here is that thumb grip from SmallRig, and we're just gonna go ahead and slot that on the top here. Gives a little more ergonomics to the camera and doesn't block this dial. The shutter button is actually threaded, which means you could thread this with any customized shutter button you want. And for the sake of this video, I just have this nice red one, which I'm going to thread into place. And then the last thing that I'm gonna install onto the camera is this L bracket by SmallRig. This actually doesn't block the battery door, gives an Arca Swiss plate, which means you could attach this to tripods, and it comes with a handy tool on the bottom here, which helps with installation, and install this onto the bottom. Once that's secure on the bottom, you could just put this tool back. It's magnetic, so you'll never lose it. And now you can see we have a little more grip to the X-M5. The next accessory I recommend for this camera are spare batteries. This camera uses the smaller Fujifilm batteries, as explained before. You want to get at least 2 or 3 spares to make sure that it lasts you. And then the final add-on to make this the complete package is extra lenses. Right here, we have the 8mm, which is a super wide vlog lens. So the 8mm is a complementary lens to the kit lens, as it can be used for vlogging and it's a completely different angle. But this lens I'm going to recommend is just a straight upgrade. This is Fujifilm's 16 to 55. This is their newest, most powerful lens. This is going to give the best image quality possible out of X-M5. On the front of the camera, you see you have what the camera is, which is X-M5. You also have this focusing LED, which helps with focus at night. And then you have your front command dial right here, which can also be pressed in. On the bottom of the camera, you have the lens release, which we use to put the lens on and off. On the left side of the camera, you could see that it's completely empty. And this is so the rotating screen does not have any obstructions or intrusions. On the right side of the camera is where you could see some of those ports. You could see on the top here is the headphone port, and then below that is the HDMI and the USB-C, which can be used to connect this to a computer or charge the camera. On the bottom of the camera, it's very standard. You can see that we have that accessory plate that's protecting most of the bottom. Right here, we could see unobstructed is the battery compartment and the SD compartment. On the top of the camera, you could see that we have the film simulation dial, and then we have our mode selection dial here on the right side. Then on the bottom right here, we have our second command dial, which is a rotating dial as well. We have a record button, and then we have our shutter button here, which you can half press to focus and full press to take photos. And then attached to that, we have a lever that allows us to switch the camera from on to off. Then under this thumb grip, you can see that we have a Fujifilm hot shoe. And last but not least, Q button, which allows you to get into the quick menu. On the back of the camera, you have the drive and delete button right here. Then you have this plastic cover, which is the mic port. Then you have the playback button, the auto exposure lock and autofocus lock button, the joystick, which can be moved around and pressed in. You have the menu OK button, and you have the display and back button. You can also access the screen from here. There is an accessory port here, which can be used for the Fujifilm fan to prevent this camera from overheating. So that's a walkthrough of Fujifilm X-M5. If any of those buttons are confusing, once we finish setting up this camera, I'm gonna do a little overview on how to shoot with this camera, and then all the buttons should make sense. So right now, let's hop into the settings page and let's set this camera up. So the first thing that we're gonna do is turn on the camera, and once we do this, you can see the screen asking us to pick our language, and you can just push in this control button to select the options. I'm gonna select English. Then we're gonna go ahead and select the area that we live in. For me, it is New York. Daylight savings is on. All right, once the date is selected, we can go ahead and okay that. Once we hit OK to the last screen, we can see auto power off temperature, and we're just gonna select high. This will make it so this camera is less likely to turn off and overheat. So before we do anything else, I just wanna make sure that we have C set on the film simulation and that we have M set on the camera. This is manual mode. If you're in auto, some of the settings might not be available. So now we are in the menu, and I'm going to fly through this whole menu system so you can understand it. And there are some options that are not as valuable as others, and I won't really explain those. If it is valuable, I'm going to try to explain it as best as possible. So to make sure that our JPEGs are the best size, we want to make sure that we have this large 3x2. You can see it tells you the number of shots that you will get at this. For image quality, this is going to tell us what kind of JPEGs we have, or this is going to allow us to shoot RAW, and we're going to do fine plus RAW. Fine is what is going to be impacted by the Fujifilm simulations, whereas RAW is not going to be impacted by them, but you can edit them later. There is an option to have a lossless compressed file, which basically means the file is going to be smaller, but you're not going to lose any data. JPEG and HEIF files are kind of debated in the community. JPEG is easier to share than an HEIF file. It's a little more compatible, whereas an HEIF is a little bit better of a file. Me personally, I'm still using JPEGs. I think they're perfectly fine, and I like them. So this is how we can change what is on the film simulation dial. And in here, you can actually select which custom film simulations are going to be on there. And then you could also change your Acros profile to pick which kind of filter that you want. I always like the red filter, so I'm gonna put that on, but just look at the top dial and see which film simulations you're missing, and then you could go ahead and put those on the dial here. So right now, because we're in that custom mode, we can choose what film simulation that we have right now. More often than not, my favorite is classic chrome. So the next many options that we have inside of the image quality menu is all about the film simulations. This is all only going to impact the JPEGs. It's not going to impact the RAW. So if you're only gonna use RAW inside of your camera, you don't really have to do anything here. If you're only going to shoot JPEGs, then you're going to want to watch a video that I have listed down in the description. That's going to go over custom film simulations and custom recipes. This is going to explain everything. I'll have that link down below. We'll just quickly go through these. So grain effect is the texture. And once again, this is only going to impact the JPEG, and you could go in here and choose the roughness and the size. Color chrome effect is a little bit like saturation, and you can go in here and just choose weak or strong to impact your saturation. Honestly, for viewing the images through the camera, I like turning this up because it pops the colors on the screen and makes it a little easier for me to see color contrast. So I'm gonna set this to strong. I'm also gonna set the color chrome effect. This is very similar. It's like saturation just for the blues. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn this to strong too. If you do notice that the colors are too vibrant for you, you can go ahead and set these off. For white balance, we could hop into this and you could see that you have all of these options to choose from depending on the type of lighting scenario that you're in. More often than not, I'm gonna be in auto. But you can go into here and then kind of add a tint to your white balance, which is something that's very popular inside of the recipes. I usually go and add a little bit of yellow into my white balance just to give it a little bit of a gold shift. I would either leave this at 0, or bring this a little to the yellows if you like it a little warmer. But for the sake of this video, I'll just keep it at 0 so it doesn't confuse anyone. Now, dynamic range is a really interesting setting, and this only impacts the JPEGs once again. If you go up to 400, it is gonna raise your ISO, so you can't shoot at your lowest ISO. And this is because the camera is kind of, for lack of better terms, bracketed the image. If you don't know what that is, it's taken many exposures and then in post you can combine those to get a better dynamic range. So if you do DR100, this doesn't do any processing to your image. If you do DR200, then you lose a stop of ISO, but your camera will bring back your highlights one stop. And if you do DR400, you lose 2 stops of your ISO, but your camera will automatically pull your highlights 2 stops back. But just to set this camera up, I'm just gonna go with DR100 to start. For the dynamic range priority, this is just gonna allow us to choose between weak, strong, and auto, and it's only gonna impact the JPEGs once again. You will lose access to the dynamic range and the tone curve selectors, so we're just gonna go ahead and leave this off. So when we go into the tone curve menu, you can see that you have this line here, and on the left side is your blacks, and on the right side is your whites. And as you can see, if we pull the highlights down, you can see that highlight tone curve going down a little bit, which means all of those highlights are gonna be pulled down a little bit. And if you pull the shadows down, it actually bumps up the black side, which means the darker parts of the image are gonna be a little more exposed. And then going the other way, if you pull this up to 4, then you're gonna see you get a classic S curve. And if you've heard about this S curve, it is a contrasty curve. It's all personal preference at this point, but for me, I'm just gonna set this at 0, 0. Once again, not to confuse anyone. Now color, this is once again saturation, and I would most likely bring this up a little bit because I really love a little color, but I'm just gonna turn that off. Sharpness is self-explanatory. Would also probably bring this up or bring this down depending on how much digital sharpness you want. We'll just leave this at 0. High ISO noise reduction. 0 is apparently some processing, so a lot of people bring this down to -3 to actually turn the processing off. I'm just gonna leave this at 0. Portrait enhancer is supposed to add a little skin smoothing to an image, and you could choose between weak, medium, and strong. Honestly, I don't really like this setting, so I'm gonna turn this off. And clarity adds this nice bloom to the image, and a lot of people really love to bring this down, including myself. I would probably bring it between -2 and -4, but for this, I'll just leave it at 0. Long exposure noise reduction is something that we can turn off. It's just gonna speed the camera up a little bit by not doing any processing on the image. Lens modulation optimizer on. Color space, you always wanna be in sRGB. That's gonna make sure that the images don't come out in any weird colors. Pixel mapping, we don't have to worry about. And then edit, save, custom settings. This is what that whole video is about. And basically you can save a combination of clarity, high ISO noise reduction, sharpness, color, tone curve, all of these settings you can save into a custom recipe. That's what a recipe is. And if you want to know how to do that, just bookmark the video down below and watch that later. Auto update custom settings, you'll see something that I set in the video is I want to disable this, so I turn that off. Custom mode setting, you could see that we have C1, C2, C3, C4. You basically just set up some quick settings here to make sure that you are easily choosing the correct settings inside of your camera and not having to go through all of the options. You could just flick that switch on the top and get your custom settings easily. But we're not going to worry about this. Now we're in the autofocus and manual focus options. For focus area, you can click into this and you could actually use this back dial to make this single point bigger or smaller. So what I likely do is go into the smallest single point that's available, and that is the option that I like to set. For focus mode, you can see we have single, continuous, and manual. So for me, I do single AF, which means when you half press the button, it's going to lock onto the subject and then stay that way until you press the shutter. For AF mode, keep it at all. Zone custom settings are basically what do you want the custom zones to look like, and as you can see, they look like this. For the AF mode, all settings here, you could go in here and you could select which ones of these you want to show up. I recommend just leaving them all on, especially if you're experimenting with your first camera. For AFC custom settings, this is another thing that is very subjective, and you kind of can tweak the camera to how you like it. You have set 1, multi-purpose, set 2, ignore objects and continue to track the subject, set 3, set 4, set 5, and then set 6 is custom. I just keep it at the multi-purpose, but if you find that that's not working for you, then try out some of these other ones. Store AF mode by orientation. This is if you rotate the camera, will it change the AF mode? I have this off. AF point display, keep that as off. Wrap focus point is basically like Pac-Man, and when your focus point gets close to the screen, it'll hop onto the other side. I'm going to disable it because sometimes I lose my focus point if I'm not paying attention. Number of focus points, you can increase this, but it becomes kind of excessive with 425. 117 is perfect. Pre-autofocus, you want this as off or your camera's gonna keep focusing. AF illuminator, you're gonna keep this off. Face eye detection, you're gonna wanna go ahead and turn this on, and you're gonna wanna turn this on to eye auto. That's how I like to keep it. Subject detection, I'm not a big fan of. I don't use it that often. You have animal, bird, automobile, motorcycle, airplane, train. Personally, I'm gonna leave that off. AF plus MF basically means you can manual focus while you're in autofocus mode. I recommend leaving this off. Manual focus assist. If you do use manual focus, you could turn this on. Otherwise, don't even bother. Interlock, manual focus assist, and focus range off. Focus check off. Interlock spot AE and focus area. You could just keep this on as default. Instant autofocus setting. This is really up to you. You can do AFS or AFC, just depending on if you want continuous or singular. I'm gonna do single. Depth of field scale, you could see pixel basis or film format basis. We'll just leave this at pixel basis. Release or focus priority is actually pretty important. It basically is gonna allow you to choose if you want the priority to be to take the image, even if it might be blurry, or to wait until it's in focus, but you might miss the moment. I really like when my images are in focus. That's kind of the perfectionist in me. Touchscreen mode, a lot of people will like to keep this on, and I would recommend having it on the autofocus mode because that's gonna be like a phone tap to focus. But for me, I really don't like it at all, and I turn it off. Now we're hopping into the shooting options here, and you can see we have some grayed out stuff, which means we don't really have to worry about that. Some of the stuff that we can't access can be accessed when you're in auto. As you can see, auto mode settings, you can then select filters and other cool things. If you put yourself into the filter mode on this camera, it's going to give you access to a couple other options that are kind of like film simulations. Sports finder mode off, pre-shots off, self-timer off, save self-timer setting off, self-timer lamp on. That's fine if you need it and you do end up using it. Bracket settings, I don't really recommend bracketing. If you get the right exposure, it's perfectly fine. Film simulation bracket, I also don't really recommend using it. I feel like you should just pick one film simulation and also shoot raw. Focus bracket settings off. Shutter type, you want to make sure you have mechanical shutter. Here's the interval timer, and basically this is a self-timer. If a self-timer was going to keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting, this is a good way to get time lapses and do other types of cool effects. You do with in-camera timer, and then basically you're going to select the number of shots that you want, which I recommend setting to infinity. And then when you are done with the image, you can just turn off the camera and it'll stop the interval timer. And then the interval, about 3 seconds is a good one. It's just going to keep shooting over and over and over again. It gets candid moments, it gets better images. Interval timer, shooting exposure smoothing. You could turn this off. Flicker reduction off. Interval priority mode off. Flickerless shutter speed setting off. This setting right here, ISO, is actually extremely important. And if we hop into Auto 1, you could see that it has its default sensitivity, which is usually set to the lowest, and you want to make sure it is set to the lowest. And then you want to set its max sensitivity. So this Auto ISO will try to shoot at the lowest ISO of 160 until it reaches its max sensitivity of 800. And at that point, it would start changing your shutter speed, which the min shutter speed is auto. It's usually dependent on the lens. I usually go ahead and set this to something that I feel like I can confidently handhold. Because this camera doesn't have IBIS, it means that the lens is going to have to do all of the work to get a stable image. I'll probably do 1/100th of a second to be safe and make sure my min shutter speed is not getting any blurry photos. For Auto 2 and Auto 3, the next thing that I do is basically the exact same thing, except now we're just going to bump up this max sensitivity. So first one was 800. So you know if you're in Auto 1, you're probably shooting during the day. The second max sensitivity, you have 3200, which means you could probably shoot at golden hour and blue hour and still get good images. Once again, I'm going to go in here and set that 1/100th, and then we're going to back out. And then Auto 3, you can see we have a huge max sensitivity, 12,800. I think that's a little high for me. I'm just going to go to 6400, just bump it up only one more stop. And then I'm going to go to 1/100th right here. So Auto 3 would be used for those nighttime shots. Cooling fan settings, you don't have to mess with unless you're using that accessory. Wireless communication is great because you can connect this to the Fujifilm X app. And if you do connect this to the X app, then you have the option to remote control the camera, rename the camera, and you could even do firmware updates for the camera. It also gets the internal clock of the camera to be the same as your phone. Flash settings on this camera are pretty self-explanatory. This doesn't have a flash, so we don't have to do anything here. The setup page is one of the biggest and most important pages inside of the camera, and we're gonna hop into these user options first. This is gonna format the SD card inside of the camera. And if you have any precious memories on your SD card, you don't want to do this. But if you've backed up those photos and you want to start fresh, then you could go ahead and format this, and this is going to erase everything on the SD card. Area settings and date time is something that we set up in the beginning. Same with time difference and language. So my menu settings is this grayed out page on the bottom here. And basically this is a page where you could access your quick settings in your camera, and you can select between almost all of the settings that we've went through before and then just put them into a little bundle so they're easier to find. So I keep mine really simple for photo. All I really want to know is this raw recording, and this is basically that uncompressed and compressed file. Most of the time I'm shooting compressed, but for some reason if I really want to shoot uncompressed, I just want to have that easy to access because I kind of forget where that is sometimes. The next item is extremely important, and that's the interval timer shooting. I want to make sure that if I need to do that self timer, I can easily access that. As you can see, it's in the second option of this page, and it's just in a really weird place, so I want to make sure that that is easy to get to. And then the third option is the shutter type. Once again, it's in a weird spot, and for some reason if I need electronic shutter and I need a faster shutter, I want to make sure I can get to that quickly, so I'm just going to put that in right there. That's essentially everything that I need. I can't put in some stuff that I would like I would like to put format my SD card in there. For some reason Fujifilm doesn't let us, so for now those are just the 3 things that I have right now. And you can see raw recording lossless, interval timer shooting, and then mechanical shutter. Sensor cleaning you shouldn't have to worry about unless you're swapping lenses too much. Firmware update, you could do this through the X app, so we won't have to worry about that. Resets can be done if you mess up all these settings or you just want to start over from scratch. You can go in here and reset this camera to the initial state. You have support website and you have the regulatory. If you want sounds on this camera, you could start turning some of these on. For the most part, you usually want this camera to be kind of stealthy, so I'm gonna turn all of these off. Playback volume, you could leave at 7, that's just gonna be for video. And then 4-channel audio playback, you can turn off. Screen settings are pretty important, but you're not gonna have to change them too much. The LCD brightness is probably the one that you'll change the most. You're just gonna go in here and you're going to change this to your liking. And for outside, you'll probably turn this up, and inside you'll probably turn this down, but we'll just leave this at 0 to start. LCD color, now this is color on the screen. This does not impact the photos, which means you don't wanna change this because you will get a different image than what you see in the camera. Same thing with LCD color adjustment, don't touch this. Image display, you leave off. Auto rotate display, I leave off. Preview, exposure, and white balance in manual mode, you want to make sure that you're previewing these so you can see if your camera is getting the correct exposure. Natural live view, you'll leave off. For the electronic level, you could turn a 3D or a 2D one on. Framing guidelines, I'm big on the rule of thirds, so I would pick grid 9. Auto rotate, I keep off. Focus scale units, I'm just gonna use feet. Aperture unit for cinema lens, you want to make sure that this is the t-stop. That's just how cinema lenses work. So display custom settings is essentially everything that we see on the screen here. I just quickly went through it, so it's selected the way that I want it. So I have frame and guideline, focus frame, and focus indicator all on. Then I have AF distance and MF distance indicators off, histogram on, live view alert off, shoot in mode off, aperture, shutter speed, ISO on, information background on, exposure compensation as a digit, the scale is off, focus mode is on, photometry, shutter, and flash all off, continuous mode, dual IS mode, and touchscreen mode all off, all of the vlog options off, white balance on, film simulation off, dynamic range, boost, and coolant fan setting all off, frames remaining, image quality, movie mode on, communication status off, mic level on, microphone direction on, guidance, no storage message, date time, battery level, and frame and outline all on. Now this is all personal preference, but I find that this is a balance between having the right information on my screen and having the least amount of information on my screen. So as you can see, this looks really good, and I am very happy with how this looks, and I've been rocking this on all of my Fujifilm cameras. If you want large indicators on the LCD, you could turn them on, and this is basically just going to make some of these really big and get rid of the others. I don't really like it, so I'm not going to turn it on. And if you do turn it on, then you could go in here and once again, you could see which indicators it'll make really big and what you can select on the screen. Kind of makes the camera feel a little bit like a toy, but if you have any bad vision or you want the camera to be a little easier to use, the large indicators can be helpful. Information contrast adjustment, in here you could choose what the menus look like. You could see you could have red for the dark ambient lighting, low contrast, standard contrast, or high contrast. I actually like high contrast, so I'm gonna go put that on. I usually put on all my cameras. Location info off, and then Q menu background. I actually turn these to black and not transparent, just personal preference. All right, next up we have focus lever settings, and in here we're just gonna do, if we push in the focus lever, which is what they call the joystick, this is going to zoom, but I like to have this reset to the center just in case my focus point gets too out of whack. And then for tilt, I like to have this edit the focus area. So as you can see, if we move this focus lever, this will allow us to change it. And if we push it in, it'll move to center, and then we can just save that. Now we have the photo and video quick menus, and here I just like to do 8 image size, image quality, dynamic range, flicker reduction, photometry, flash function, and flash compensation. This is all personal preference, so you can use what works best for you. So function FN setting is how we actually set up the custom buttons inside of this camera. So record button stays the record button. The Q button opens up the quick menu. All of the touch functions are turned off. And then the auto exposure lock or autofocus lock button gets turned into the AF on button, which allows for back button focus in. For the power zoom lens functions, you can just leave this as they are. So in here, we could set up the command dials, and we can actually do this by mode on the camera. So the first mode that we're going to set it up is manual mode. So basically, to make these command dials work perfectly, you need to have the exposure triangle, which is ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. A lot of times, like on this lens, you actually get aperture on the lens. But since the first lens that comes with this camera actually doesn't have it, we're going to set this camera up just a little differently to make sure that it works properly. So as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 selections for the command dial. And if you remember, we can actually push in the front command dial to switch between these. So that's how we're going to go between them. And then on the back is one that is going to permanently be set. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I don't need to select films on the command dial. So I'm going to go ahead and select this to none. Now, the next thing that I want to make an emphasis is that I don't necessarily want my command dial settings to change per mode. Now, this does mean in certain modes that these dials are going to be kind of not useful, but it still makes sense for me because I want the camera, no matter what mode I'm put in, to operate exactly the same. So for that reason, even though we're in manual mode, I'm going to set this back dial to exposure compensation. So this won't actually do anything in manual mode, but we're going to go ahead, and the first thing that I like to set and have set is the shutter speed. It's something that I change the most often, followed by ISO. And then the third thing to complete the exposure triangle is to set the aperture. So then we could cycle between shutter speed, ISO, and aperture on the front dial, and then just use this back dial for exposure compensation. So I'm going to back out, and I'm just going to do that for every single one of these dials. So now we have it set up for the shutter priority mode, the aperture priority mode, and the manual mode, and it should all operate mainly through that front command dial, with this back command dial just operating as exposure compensation. We could leave this as on, and then command dial direction, we could just leave these normal. For shutter AF, this is where we're going to go if we want to activate back button focus. If we click into this, you could see we can turn this off, and then we would do autofocus through this button, which is now the AF on button. But for the sake of this video, we're actually going to leave these on and just half press the focus. It's a lot easier for most people. Same thing for this, the shutter auto exposure, we can leave these both on. Shoot without lens, I'm going to leave this off. So if there's no lens on this camera, it won't let you press the shutter. Same thing, shoot without card, we're going to turn this off. So if you forget a card, it's not going to let you take images. For the lens zoom and focus settings, you can just go ahead and leave these all at the default. If you do want to change them, it's a little bit of personal preference, but you probably will not have to change this. They are fine the way they are. For auto exposure and autofocus lock mode, you can just leave this the way it is. And for auto white balance lock mode, you can leave this the way it is. For the record button setting, we can just leave this the way it is. For touchscreen settings, we're going to leave this off. And for lock, we're not going to touch this either. We're making our way down, and now we're going to hop into power management. Power management, this is a lot of personal preference, but I'm going to go into auto power off and set this to 5 minutes. For performance, I'm actually going to boost this. For boost setting, you could choose if you want to increase the LCD resolution or optimize brightness. I'm going to increase this LCD resolution. And then the auto power off, we put at high in the beginning when we set the camera up. For save data setup, this is a little bit of personal preference. This is just how you want to save your files. For me, I want to renew every single time that I reset my SD card. For file name, I'm going to keep this pretty simple. I'm just going to name this the Fujifilm X-M5 to remember that this is the camera that I was shooting with. Even though I'm never going to use the Adobe RGB, I'm just going to set this to X-M5 now, just in case for some reason I do. I want to make sure I remember that I shot it with this camera. For the folder selection, that doesn't really matter to me, so I'm not going to change it. For copyright info, I'm just going to enter my name, Steele. And then for copyright info, I'm just going to go in here and select all rights reserved. So then if we display the copyright info, it should say my name and all rights reserved. And then that will be good for copyright information. We do have one page left with this network and USB settings. And as you see, you have the Bluetooth settings if you want to connect to the app. You have airplane mode if you're using this on an airplane, network settings. You connect this to an Instax printer. You can connect this to Frame.io camera to cloud. You can connect this to a webcam, or you could tether it, or you could do a card reader. There's a ton of useful stuff in this network page. USB power supply, information, and then you could reset your network settings. But for most people, you're never gonna have to go into this page. So realistically, we don't have to set anything up in here. You have now seen the camera be unboxed, the accessories put onto the camera, a walkthrough of the camera, setting up the photo mode. So the next part of this tutorial is just walking through how to shoot photos, and we're gonna go into manual mode. So we can easily select any film simulation on this camera by rotating this dial. Most people will probably leave this at C if they're gonna use custom recipes. Now, when we're in manual mode, you can notice that the exposure compensation does not do anything for us. And you can see that our exposure triangle is essentially on this front command dial. By pressing it in, we can switch from shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. Switch the shutter speed by rotating this dial, push it in. Now I can set the ISO. We're just gonna set this to the auto ISO of ISO 3200. And then if we press that in one more time, you see we have the aperture. And if you have a lens like this, then you don't even need to worry about pressing that button to do it. You can just go ahead and change it on the lens here. It's super easy. If you don't have a lens like this, then you could just go in here and you can change your aperture easily through the camera using that front dial. What I recommend for most people is to shoot in aperture priority mode. Now, what this means is the camera is going to control the shutter speed, and this is overall an easy way to use the camera. So if you did want to shoot with shutter speed priority, you could just go in here, and that means that this will now control my aperture. You could even go into auto if you're completely scared, and then all you have to worry about is just focus in, and you know that you have everything else set up pretty well. Now, the things that we have left is this filter mode. When you go in filter mode in this camera, you can then hop into these filter settings that were grayed out before, and now you can select between toy camera, miniature, pop color, high key, low key, dynamic tone, soft focus, partial color red, partial color orange, partial color yellow, partial color green, partial color blue, and partial color purple. These filters are actually pretty cool, and not many people know about them. They only know about the film simulations. But if you want to get some cool JPEGs out of your camera, you can go into filter mode and unlock all of these different options. Go into this playback menu to review the photos. You could delete them here, but you could shift through them on this back joystick. And then eventually when you're done, just pop out your SD card and you can get all those photos onto your computer. So overall, that is Fujifilm X-M5. It's one of the smallest, most affordable, greatest Fujifilm cameras.